The Silent Pursuit. Chapter 1. The Stranger. Jack Reacher sat in the farthest corner of a dusty diner, somewhere in the middle of nowhere, Arizona. He wore his usual worn-out jeans, leather boots, and a simple cotton shirt. Traveling light, as always, with no specific destination. The heat from the desert bled through the windows, and the soft crackle of the radio played in the background, announcing some local crime he wasn't interested in. Not yet, at least. As he sipped his black coffee, something caught his attention. A man burst through the diner's door, his breathing ragged, his eyes wild as they scanned the room. The man was in an expensive, disheveled suit, his tie askew. Everything about him screamed urgency and fear. The kind of fear Reacher knew too well. The fear of being hunted. The man slumped into a booth 2 tables ahead of Reacher, hands trembling as he reached for a glass of water. By now, the small-town vibe had fully grabbed Reacher's interest. A guy dressed like that didn't belong in a place like this. A high-end suit in the middle of a truck-stop diner was an anomaly he couldn't ignore. Instinctively, Reacher noticed the next move before it happened. 2 men walked in right after. Big, muscular guys, their arms covered in tattoos. They moved with a calculated precision, the kind Reacher recognized in trained professionals. These weren't just random thugs, they were hunters, and the man in the suit was their prey. Reacher had 2 choices: finish his coffee and leave the diner, pretending he hadn't noticed a thing. Or, get involved. The man in the suit saw the 2 brutes the moment they entered. His panic intensified as he realized he had nowhere to run. The 2 men exchanged a look, their eyes locking onto their target. They started toward him, slow but deliberate, like lions stalking their kill. Reacher calmly set his cup down. He wasn't looking for trouble, but trouble had a way of finding him. His muscles tensed slightly under his shirt as he stood up, already planning his next moves in his head. "Hey," one of the men growled at the man in the suit. "You're coming with us." The man's hand shook as he reached for his wallet. His voice cracked. I can pay you. Please, just let me go." Reacher stepped forward, his massive frame casting a shadow over the 2 goons. "Why don't you let the guy finish his breakfast?" Reacher said, his voice low but unmistakably dangerous. The 2 men turned to face Reacher, their eyes narrowing. The diner had fallen silent. The waitress froze mid-step, sensing the tension in the air. "Who the hell are you?" One of the men snarled. Reacher's expression didn't change. "Nobody," he replied. "Just a guy who doesn't like watching people get pushed around." The larger of the 2 men smirked. "You should walk away, friend. This isn't your business." Reacher's cold blue eyes locked onto the man's. "Now it is." Enjoying the story? Subscribe and share to see what happens next. Reacher doesn't back down from a fight. Chapter 2. The Hit. The larger man didn't bother with any more words. He lunged, throwing a punch aimed at Reacher's head, fast and heavy. But Reacher was faster. He stepped to the side, grabbed the man's arm mid-swing, and twisted hard. There was a sickening snap as the man's shoulder dislocated. He howled in pain, stumbling backward into a table, knocking over plates and cups. The second man, seeing his partner go down, hesitated for a split second. It was enough time for Reacher to close the distance. His fist drove into the man's gut like a battering ram, doubling him over. Without missing a beat, Reacher brought his elbow down onto the back of the man's neck, sending him crashing to the floor. The diner was dead silent. The 2 thugs lay groaning at Reacher's feet, clutching their injuries. Reacher turned to the man in the suit, who was wide-eyed, paralyzed by fear. "Who are they?" Reacher asked, his voice calm but commanding. The man stammered, "They're from a cartel. I took something I shouldn't have. I thought I could outrun them." Reacher nodded slowly, piecing it together. "You stole from the cartel, and now they want you dead." The man nodded, sweat dripping down his forehead. I had no choice. They would have killed me if I didn't. But now... Reacher glanced down at the two men on the floor, both groaning in pain but still alive. Looks like they're not done yet, he muttered. Suddenly, the sound of screeching tires filled the air. Through the diner's windows, Reacher spotted a black SUV pulling up. More men. Reinforcements. How many? Reacher asked, already scanning the room for exits. 5, maybe 6 more, the man in the suit whispered, terror in his voice. Reacher's mind worked fast. This wasn't the kind of fight he could just walk away from anymore. The cartel wasn't going to stop coming after this guy. And now, thanks to his intervention, Reacher was part of it too. Reacher sighed. All right, he said, stepping toward the door. Time to finish this. The man in the suit blinked in disbelief. What are you doing? Ending it, Reacher replied, his voice cold as steel. Want to see how Reacher handles the next wave? Subscribe and stay tuned for the explosive continuation. Chapter 3. The Arrival. Reacher stood by the diner door, watching as the black SUV skidded to a stop outside. The desert heat shimmered around it like a haze, but even through the glare, Reacher could make out the shapes of men inside, 6, maybe 7. Armed. He could tell from the way they moved, the way they sat in the car, that they were professionals. The kind who didn't ask questions before pulling the trigger. He turned to the man in the suit, who was still cowering in his seat. Get out the back, Reacher said, his voice calm. And don't stop running. But, the men started. Reacher's expression didn't waver. Go. I'll handle this. The man hesitated for a moment, then nodded, stumbling to his feet. He dashed toward the kitchen, disappearing through the back door just as the first thug stepped out of the SUV. The diner was eerily quiet. The waitress had long since retreated to the back, and the few other customers had slipped out unnoticed. Now, it was just Reacher and the cartel. The first man through the door was built like a tank, with broad shoulders and a scar that ran from his temple to his jaw. He carried a handgun, and his eyes immediately scanned the room, looking for his target. He didn't seem to notice Reacher standing near the door, at least, not right away. Behind him, 2 more men followed, similarly armed and just as menacing. Scarface spotted the 2 men Reacher had already dealt with, still groaning on the floor, and his face twisted in anger. Where is he? He growled, pointing his gun around the diner. Reacher took a step forward, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. The sound caught Scarface's attention. He spun around, gun raised, but Reacher was already moving. He grabbed the man's wrist, twisting it sharply, and the gun clattered to the ground. Scarface swung with his other fist, but Reacher ducked, then drove his shoulder into the man's midsection, sending him crashing into the counter. The 2 other men reacted immediately, pulling their guns and leveling them at Reacher. He grabbed Scarface by the back of his neck and yanked him upright, using him as a human shield. The 2 thugs hesitated, guns trained on Reacher, but unsure of whether to shoot. Drop them, Reacher said, his voice steady. One of the men smirked. You think you're walking out of here alive? Reacher didn't answer. Instead, he pulled Scarface closer and squeezed the man's neck harder. Drop them, Reacher repeated, his grip tightening. Or I'll break his spine right here. The man in Reacher's grasp let out a choked gasp, and the others exchanged nervous glances. The seconds stretched long, tense, and then finally, one of the men sighed and lowered his gun. That's more like it, Reacher muttered. He shoved Scarface toward them, then swept his leg under the second man, sending him sprawling. Before the last one could react, Reacher closed the distance, his fist connecting with the guy's jaw with a solid crack. The man crumpled to the floor. Reacher didn't waste time. He crouched down, picking up one of the discarded handguns, and moved toward the door. Outside, the engine of the SUV was still running, more men likely waiting inside. Reacher stepped through the doorway, the dry desert wind whipping across his face. Sure enough, 2 more men were in the vehicle, eyes wide as they saw their comrades taken down so quickly. One reached for his gun, but Reacher fired a warning shot into the dirt near their feet. "Out," Reacher ordered. The driver froze, his hand shaking on the wheel. The other man raised his hand slowly and slid out of the vehicle, face pale. Reacher kept the gun trained on them as they exited. "Get lost," Reacher said, his tone leaving no room for argument. The 2 men exchanged a look, then bolted, disappearing into the dusty landscape without a second thought. Reacher watched them go, making sure they were far enough away before he turned and walked back toward the diner. Inside, the silence was deafening. Scarface and his goons were either unconscious or too injured to move, and Reacher could hear the faint sound of sirens approaching from somewhere far off. The man in the suit had returned, peeking out from the kitchen. His eyes were wide, his face pale. Are they gone?" "For now," Reacher said, holstering the gun. "But they'll keep coming." The men swallowed hard. "What do we do?" Reacher glanced toward the horizon, his mind already working out the next steps. "We make them stop," he said. "Once and for all." Reacher's not done yet. Subscribe and share to find out how he plans to end this cartel threat once and for all. Chapter 4. The Plan. Reacher stood outside the diner, the fading desert sun casting long shadows across the empty road. The distant sirens grew louder, but he knew the local authorities wouldn't be much help. The cartel was a much bigger problem than any small-town police force could handle. The man in the suit stumbled out of the diner behind him, still jittery. "What do you mean, make them stop?" "These guys are relentless. They won't just give up." Reacher glanced at him, his face unreadable. "They'll stop if there's no one left to send." The man paled. You're serious?" Reacher's blue eyes hardened. "Dead serious. What exactly did you steal?" The men hesitated, looking down the road as if expecting more cartel members to show up any second. "I took a drive, an external hard drive. It's got financial records, contacts, dirt on all the big players in the cartel. I figured I could use it as leverage. To disappear." Reacher sighed. "You thought you could blackmail a cartel and walk away?" He shook his head. "You must be dumber than you look." The man winced. "I didn't have a choice. They were going to kill me either way." Reacher stared off into the distance, his mind racing. This wasn't just about money. This drive was a time bomb, one that could bring down the entire operation if it fell into the right hands. And that meant the cartel wouldn't stop until they got it back. "Where's the drive now?" Reacher asked. The man fumbled inside his suit jacket and pulled out a small, sleek device. He handed it over with shaky hands. Reacher took it and slipped it into his pocket. "They'll track it," the man said. "They have people everywhere. You think you can take them on by yourself?" Reacher glanced at him, his expression cold and unwavering. "I don't need to take them all on. Just the right ones." The sirens grew closer, and soon, 2 police cruisers pulled up in front of the diner. 3 officers stepped out, hands on their weapons, eyes scanning the scene. Cartel members scattered on the ground, some still unconscious, others groaning in pain. One of the officers approached Reacher, looking him up and down with suspicion. "You mind explaining what happened here?" Reacher didn't blink. "Cartel hit squad came after him," he said, nodding toward the man in the suit. "I stopped them." The officer narrowed his eyes. "And who are you, exactly?" "Just passing through," Reacher said, his voice level. "But these guys won't be the last. They'll send more." The officer looked at the beaten men on the ground, then back at Reacher. "We'll take it from here." Reacher shook his head. "No, you won't. This is bigger than your department can handle. If you don't want more of these guys showing up and turning this place into a war zone, you'll let me take care of it." The officer opened his mouth to protest, but something in Reacher's eyes made him hesitate. After a long moment, he nodded. Fine. But if more of them come back, we'll be ready. Reacher knew better. The cartel would be back, and this time, they'd come in full force. The only way to end it was to hit them where it hurt. He turned to the man in the suit. Where's their base of operations? The man blinked. You're not seriously thinking of going after them? You can't just walk into their stronghold. Reacher didn't respond. He was already moving, mind made up. He wasn't the type to sit around and wait for the fight to come to him. Reluctantly, the men followed. It's in the city. Phoenix. They have a warehouse near the industrial district. That's where they run most of their operations. Reacher nodded. Then that's where we're going. Can Reacher really take on the cartel at their own base? Subscribe and share to follow his next move in this high-stakes showdown. Chapter 5. The Warehouse. The sun had dipped below the horizon by the time Reacher and the man in the suit reached Phoenix. The city's sprawling industrial district loomed ahead, a maze of warehouses, shipping yards, and abandoned buildings. It was the perfect place for a cartel to operate, off the grid, out of sight, and easy to defend. Reacher parked the stolen sedan a few blocks away from their target. They sat in silence for a moment, the distant hum of machinery and occasional car horn filling the air. The man beside Reacher fidgeted nervously, his eyes darting to the dark outline of the warehouse. This is suicide, the man muttered. They've got guards, cameras, everything. We won't even make it past the front gate. Reacher checked the magazine of the handgun he'd taken from one of the cartel goons back at the diner. You're not going in. I am. The man's eyes widened. What? I thought you said we. You're staying here, Reacher interrupted, his voice firm. If things go south, you drive out of here. Fast. The man swallowed hard, but he didn't argue. He seemed to understand that, whatever Reacher was about to do, it was better done alone. Reacher stepped out of the car, the warm desert breeze brushing against his face. He moved through the shadows with the kind of silent precision he'd mastered during his military days. Every step was calculated, every movement deliberate. As he approached the warehouse, he took in the layout. 2 armed guards stood by the main entrance, their rifles slung lazily over their shoulders. They didn't look alert, not yet. There were cameras mounted on the corners of the building, but Reacher had already spotted a blind spot near the rear loading bay. That's where he'd make his move. Sticking to the shadows, Reacher circled the building, his eyes constantly scanning for more guards. He reached the back of the warehouse without being seen, then crouched low as he slipped past a rusted fence and toward the loading bay door. He paused, listening. Voices. The faint sound of a radio playing somewhere inside. He gripped the door handle, giving it a slow, careful turn. Locked. No surprise there. Reacher pulled a small folding knife from his pocket and carefully worked it into the lock. In seconds, he heard the soft click of the latch releasing. He pushed the door open just enough to slip inside, his senses on high alert. The warehouse was dimly lit, the only light coming from a few flickering bulbs overhead. Stacks of wooden crates lined the walls, marked with numbers and foreign labels. Shipping containers filled the space, likely used to transport drugs, weapons, or worse. Reacher moved quickly and quietly, keeping low as he made his way deeper into the building. He could hear voices now, closer, louder. He edged around a corner and spotted a group of men huddled by a table in the center of the room. They were counting money, stacks of bills piled high. But Reacher wasn't interested in them. Not yet. He needed to find the boss. The men who ran this entire operation. And he knew exactly where to look. Moving past the counting table, Reacher continued toward the far end of the warehouse. That's when he saw it, a large office, glass windows overlooking the entire floor. The lights were on inside, and through the glass, he could make out the figure of a man sitting behind a desk, talking on the phone. That was his target. Reacher crouched behind a stack of crates, planning his approach. There was only one entrance to the office, and 2 guards stood outside the door, rifles slung across their chests. Getting past them without raising the alarm wasn't going to be easy, but Reacher had never been one to shy away from a challenge. He glanced around, his eyes locking onto a nearby fire extinguisher hanging on the wall. A plan formed in his mind, and without hesitation, he grabbed the extinguisher, hefting its weight in his hands. In one swift motion, Reacher hurled the extinguisher across the room. It crashed into a stack of crates on the other side of the warehouse, the loud clang echoing through the space. The guards snapped to attention, their rifles raised as they moved toward the noise, completely unaware that Reacher had already slipped past them. He moved quickly, reaching the office door and twisting the handle. It wasn't locked. He pushed it open just as the boss inside hung up the phone, his eyes widening in shock as he saw Reacher standing there. "You've got about 10 seconds to tell me why I shouldn't put a bullet in you," Reacher said, his voice cold and controlled. The man's hands shot up in surrender, his face pale. Wait. Whatever they're paying you, I'll double it. Triple it." Reacher didn't flinch. "I don't want your money." The man's eyes flicked to a drawer in his desk, but Reacher was faster. He stepped forward and slammed the drawer shut with one hand, pinning the man in place. "You took something from me," Reacher said, leaning in close. "Something you're never getting back." The man swallowed hard, panic in his eyes. I don't know what you're talking about." Reacher stared him down, his voice a low growl. "Then you're not walking out of here." Can Reacher get the answers he needs? Don't miss the final showdown. Subscribe and share to follow the thrilling conclusion. Chapter 6. The Final Showdown. The tension in the room was palpable as Reacher loomed over the cartel boss, his gaze unwavering. The man was visibly shaking now, sweat beading on his forehead as he realized there was no easy way out of this. His eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape, but Reacher had him cornered. I can get you anything you want," the boss stammered, trying to buy himself time. "Drugs, weapons, money. Just name it." Reacher's expression remained stone cold. "I don't want anything from you. I'm here to end this." The boss swallowed hard, realizing Reacher wasn't bluffing. "Look, I don't know what you think you're doing, but you don't understand. You can't take on the cartel. Even if you kill me, they'll never stop coming after you." Reacher leaned in closer, his voice a low, dangerous whisper. "Let them try." Before the boss could respond, Reacher grabbed him by the collar and hauled him out of his chair. The man yelped as Reacher dragged him toward the window that overlooked the warehouse floor. From up here, Reacher could see the 2 guards he had distracted earlier moving back into position, their guns at the ready. "They'll kill you," the boss said, his voice barely a whisper now, panic rising in his chest. "And then they'll find that guy you're protecting. You're both dead." Reacher didn't respond. Instead, he lifted the boss up by his collar and slammed him against the window, causing the glass to crack under the force. The man's breath hitched as he realized just how close he was to being thrown through it. "You want to live?" Reacher asked, his voice a low growl. "Then you're going to tell me everything I need to know. Where's the rest of your operation? Who's pulling the strings?" The boss's eyes flickered with hesitation, but the cold look in Reacher's eyes told him he didn't have time to lie. All right. I'll tell you. The operation, it's bigger than this warehouse. We have shipments coming in from the border, through a network of smugglers. I just handle the money." Reacher's grip on the man's collar tightened. "Names." The boss coughed, gasping for air as Reacher's fist twisted the fabric. "Alvarez. He's the one in charge of the entire operation. He's the boss, not me. He runs everything from across the border. I'm just the middleman." Reacher's jaw clenched. Alvarez. That was the name he needed. Satisfied with the information, Reacher tossed the man back into his chair. "You're done," he said coldly. If I ever see your face again, I won't ask twice. The man nodded frantically, wiping sweat from his brow, too terrified to even speak. But Reacher wasn't sticking around to see what he did next. He had everything he needed. Reacher moved to the door, but just as he reached for the handle, the door burst open. One of the guards, rifle raised, stormed in. "Boss, are you?" Reacher reacted in an instant. He grabbed the guard's rifle, twisted it out of his hands, and drove the butt of the gun into the man's face, knocking him out cold. The guard crumpled to the floor, unconscious before he even knew what hit him. But the noise had drawn attention. From the warehouse floor, Reacher could hear the shouts of more cartel members. Footsteps echoed as the remaining men began closing in on his location. Time was running out. Reacher stepped over the unconscious guard and into the hallway, his senses sharp. He moved quickly, darting through the shadows as more cartel thugs swarmed the building. They didn't see him until it was too late. Reacher took down two more men with ruthless efficiency, one with a quick punch to the throat, the other with a well-placed elbow to the temple. He moved like a ghost, leaving a trail of unconscious bodies in his wake as he made his way toward the exit. Finally, he reached the loading bay. The SUV from earlier was still parked outside, engines idling. Reacher sprinted toward it, slipping into the driver's seat just as the gunfire started. Bullets pinged off the side of the vehicle as Reacher slammed the gas pedal down, sending the SUV roaring down the road. In the rearview mirror, he could see the cartel thugs scrambling after him, but they were too late. Reacher was already gone. He drove for miles in silence, the dark desert stretching out endlessly around him. The man in the suit was still waiting where Reacher had left him, nervously pacing beside the car. When Reacher pulled up, the man practically ran to meet him. "Well?" the man asked, his voice trembling. Did you do it?" Reacher stepped out of the SUV, his expression unreadable. "Alvarez," he said simply. "That's the man you need to worry about now." The man's face fell. But that means this isn't over." Reacher looked at him, his cold blue eyes cutting through the man's panic. "It's over for you. Take the drive, disappear. You're out." The man hesitated, then slowly nodded. He knew better than to argue with Reacher. He took the drive from Reacher's hand, gripping it tightly as if it were his lifeline. Reacher didn't say another word. He turned and walked away, disappearing into the night like he always did. No attachments, no strings, no one to slow him down. He dealt with the cartel threat for now. But if Alvarez came after him, Reacher wouldn't hesitate to finish what he'd started. The end. If you enjoyed our story, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications.